have being. They may change form or shape, they may degrade or decompose, but they have being, and therefore they and you and I and we all participate in the mystery, the great mystery. Meister Eckhart said, "To the extent that our life is enclosed in being, it's related to God. Our life may be very small, but if we grasp it to the extent that it is being, then it is more noble than anything that ever attained life. I am certain," he continues, "that if a soul only knew the smallest object that had being, the soul would never turn away from it, not even for a moment. If it were to know only the smallest object as it is in God, if it were to know, say, only a flower, these petals, to know these petals as a form of being, it would be more noble than anything in the world. To know the smallest object to the extent that it is being is better than knowing an angel." So maybe that's part of what's so frightening about death and change, is this notion that being stops. But really, it just shifts. Oh, there are those among us who we deny being to. How many people do you walk by each day and never even glance at, give eye contact to? When I lived in Chicago, I learned how to do that because walking down the street, I was constantly being asked for money or change or food or help, and I thought, I'll never get where I'm going if I stop and give being to each person around me. So I learned to walk through life with a little set of blinders on. And yet, what does that do? Sure, it shortens the trek, the commute from one place to another, but it cuts us off from the full glory and beauty and wonder and pain of being that is all around us and that is in us and that we are part of. We deny people being by refusing to acknowledge their presence in our lives. Some of us do that in our own families. When it's too hard to relate to somebody. Kids, do you ever get sent to your room? No? Nobody? Now, you're probably not being denied your being, but that's a place in our lives where, like, I can't deal with you right now, go be somewhere else, right? Then we can be together again later. But that's not the kind of denial of being I'm talking about. I'm talking about, what about the voices that you never listen to? The people whose opinions you refuse to hear. Like these revolutionary poets whose very beings were challenged and in some cases crushed by the societies in which they lived. They refused their being. I was reminded this week how important and how powerful it can be to have your being affirmed. I was singing with the West Michigan Gay Men's Chorus at the Making Room for All conference that was up at Central Reformed Church. Now, it's been a long time since I have been a part of an explicitly Christian community that wasn't pluralistic. And in that time, since I've come out, I thought, I don't need affirmation from Christian community. They can keep struggling with gay issues, whatever. I'm over it. But let me tell you how incredibly powerful it was to sing music I'd sung dozens of times in the presence of a group of people who were struggling for justice and inclusion, for the affirmation of simply the being of people like me in their congregations. Simple words to sing, and yet just their witness, their affirmation of our being. We all practice denial of being in some way or shape or form. The people that we bully or tease, whether in school or our workplaces. The people we ignore. The people we make fun of. Last year, when I went to New York City with our 8th graders on their coming-of-age trip, we served in a different place than we had before. We served in a food pantry, and each of us got assigned a different task. We were working with volunteers from all around the country, and my job was to sit in front of a room of people about half this size and to read a list of names, 4 at a time, so that they could come forward and stand in line to get their food that they could then take back to their families. Now, some of these names were not names I could easily pronounce. Some of them were in languages that I'm not familiar with. And here I was, this stranger from West Michigan, standing in front of a room of New Yorkers, trying to read names to tell them when they could get their food. It was one of the scariest things I've ever done in my life. And what was even harder was when people would come up to me and say, "You haven't called my name, and I've been here longer than they have." And I'd say, "I just am reading the names that they gave me, I'm sorry." "Well, you haven't called my name," they'd say. And we had to call up one of the people who worked there. And she said, "Oh, they're just working you because you're new and they think they can cut in line." Which in a way was just another way to deny their being. Sure, they were maybe trying to get ahead in the system, but they want food. And the one thing standing between them and their food was me. Wouldn't you try to get ahead in line? Being forced to stand in front of a room of well, in that case, complete strangers, and one by one to see them and to name them. After doing that for about 3 hours, I actually got to know a few of them by name, and we kind of joked. We'd start having little side conversations, and they'd eventually get up and go get their food. But we went from this place of me completely feeling disconnected from them to being forced to face them, and then to being together. In a way, I went from treating them like they were dead to me to moving into a place where we could affirm each other as people, with gifts and challenges and skills and pains and fears and hopes. And that, I think, is the message that I'm taking from El Dia de los Muertos this year. That it's not just about the people who have died and remembering that their being is a part of our being. But it's also about remembering that everyone is relying on each one of us to be with them. And so if you came today maybe remembering somebody, cherishing a little bit of who they were, maybe you put a photo of them or a memento on your altar, carry that back with you into this world and share it with someone who you may have ignored before, who you may never have seen. Look for the dead among the living and revive them. Give them being. May we have the courage and the strength for this mighty task. Amen.